Welcome to Closet Thoughts. It's the 14th of April. I'm Brihat. We're going to talk about mindfulness. This is a very commonly heard expression, and a lot of people know about it, but might not know so much about the details. So a lot of people these days are full of thoughts, but not many people are so thoughtful. This is the thing we're trying to address here, is how to become more conscious of what's going on in our mind. So this is essentially the basic idea with mindfulness. It's almost self-evident in the term, is that it means to become more mindful of what's happening in our own thoughts, mind, emotions, and to learn how the process of habit formation works. And as I explained in a previous video, the process of creating habits starts with contemplation of the objects of our senses. So for example, if we have a bad habit with smoking cigarettes or drinking alcohol, then we think about that object and then we start to get an attachment for it, a strong desire to engage in that activity, and so on. There's a lot of further effects Krishna describes, such as loss of memory and intelligence and anger. So we need to understand how this works. And this is what mindfulness can help us to do. Understand how we can get out of these bad cycles. And so towards the end of the second chapter, Krishna is describing that one can find peace of mind by becoming detached from, or undisturbed rather, by the constant desires that are entering into our mind. And so this is how our whole culture is set up, is to flood our mind with material desires. We see this in advertising. We see it in all of the media, basically, in the world, is that it's trying to flood our mind with all sorts of material desires. And then this trains us to contemplate on these objects and in turn to develop habits and attachments to those things, even if we know they're not good for us. And so this is the basic idea of mindfulness, which is generally taught. The problem is that in a lot of yoga and meditation schools, this process of mindfulness isn't completely understood. There's another side that is often left out. People are generally teaching, yoga instructors and so on, are teaching that mindfulness, in this practice, one should become passive and detached. And of course that's good. But as living beings, as spiritual beings, we have a desire to engage in activity, have emotions, relationships, and thoughts, and complex life, because we're individuals. And so we want to express ourselves in various ways. So simply to become passive and stop doing all of these activities, having emotions, this is very unnatural and completely unsatisfying. And so we need to understand the difference between material and spiritual desires. So essentially, anything which has a beginning and an end is material. And if we desire that thing, that's a material desire, and it will never bring us full satisfaction. So, for example, there's many examples we can see. A home, a car, a family, this body. These things all have a beginning and an end and are therefore, in a sense, not even real. It's like a dream. We might enjoy a certain material object for some time, but before we had it, before it was manifested, it didn't exist. It exists for some time, and then after it's disassembled, then it again doesn't exist. So it only really existed for a flash of time. If you zoom out and look at the big picture, that really doesn't mean anything. Just a very, very small blip on the universal time scale. Even my own lifetime. I've been around for 25 years in this life, and they've gone by so fast, and very quickly I'll be on my way towards leaving this body. And so this whole lifetime is so quick, and so if I'm attached to the material circumstances, the temporary material circumstances, then I'm going to always be left unsatisfied. And so generally yoga practices these days are teaching that we should just become detached from this all. But we won't be satisfied, as I was saying. So we need to understand what are spiritual desires. Well, spiritual desires are desiring something eternal, something which has no start and no end. And so some of the most basic teachings that Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita is that we as individuals are souls, and we have no birth, no death. We've always been and we always will be. There's nothing that can ever take us out of existence, because that which exists will always exist. And so that's the same thing is true with Krishna or God, is that he's always been existing, and he has no birth, no death. And so a spiritual desire is desiring something eternal. And so something eternal is actually going to bring us satisfaction because it's stable. Everyone's seeking this lasting happiness, and we don't want to be unsatisfied, but material pleasures are always leaving us unsatisfied. And spiritual and material pleasures are actually very similar in one sense, is that they both leave us wanting more. So, for example, you eat some ice cream and it makes you feel good for a moment, but then it leaves you wanting more, and you're unsatisfied. And you can try and try and try, but you'll never be totally satisfied. Our stomach has a certain capacity. Whereas with spiritual desires, we're also left wanting more at the end of the process, but the difference is that we're actually satisfied. And so this is the second part of the analogy Krishna gives here, is that like an ocean, which is constantly being filled and filled with rivers coming into it, these are compared to material desires, the ocean is totally full, and so is completely unaffected by these material desires. And so when we become satisfied with spiritual life, we don't need to indulge in material pleasures. They might still be there. Even if we become very advanced spiritually, we might still have remnants of our old conditioning and still desire material pleasures. But if we're full and satisfied in our spiritual practice, then we have no desire for those things. It's just like when someone is totally satisfied from eating, they don't care to have anything more. They don't want seconds. At least a very intelligent person. I'm still getting to that level. And so this is the interesting thing about the difference between spiritual and material desires. They both leave us wanting more. The difference is, are we satisfied or not? And so the final point is that many people out there who will hear this are already engaged in a spiritual practice and may already have a certain level of satisfaction. And so those who are on this platform have a great opportunity during this time of crisis to go deeper in our spiritual practice, and also to reach out to others, because there are many people in this world who are very unsatisfied and stuck in very bad habits and don't have a complete understanding of how this all works. And so for those of you who are watching this who are unsatisfied in certain ways, then I hope we can use this time to understand how this process of mindfulness works, how we can see our own thoughts and how they are making us unhappy or happy, depending on if they're spiritual or material, and try to inject some positive spiritual desires into our life. Spend some time with spiritual people. Give someone a call who you haven't talked to in a while, someone who inspires you. So these are my humble thoughts on mindfulness today. I hope that we can all be mindful and not full of our crazy mind. Thank you very much for listening. Hare Krishna.